Watch and burn.
Hey everybody! So tonight I am looking to discuss the Blair Witch Project. Now this was released way back in 1999. The main reason that I'm talking about it here is because it just occurred to me a little while ago that I still haven't done the Blair Witch. And then that springboarded me to start thinking about how there's a bunch of things with the Blair Witch I should have done. I think the only one I've covered so far is the second one, which is kind of weird because that's like the inferior sequel to this movie here, which is like one of the best horror movies ever made. So yeah, so this simply tells the story of I almost said Peter, Paul, and Mary. I've been listening to a lot of Peter, Paul, and Mary, mainly the Leatherwing Bat and Hangman. But this movie does not star Peter, Paul, and Mary. This movie stars Heather, Mike, and Josh, three student filmmakers who decide to go out and sort of dig into the legend of the Blair Witch, which, of course, just for anybody that doesn't know this, as of 2024, the Blair Witch isn't real. She's loosely based off, I think partly based off like the Bell Witch. I think the Bell Witch is real. But yeah, Ellie Kedward, she was considered to be a witch way back when. She was dragged out of town, tied to a tree, and she was left to starve to death there. All the while, the neighborhood kids, or the town's kids, or the village's kids, sorry, would come out and torture her. They would dip their hands in her blood and then press their their handprints onto her body as she was dying. And yeah, this led to a curse in the people of Blair and the kids on Blair. And then again, in the 1940s, there's a man by the name of Rustin Parr, a fictional individual, of course, by the name of Rustin Parr. And he was compelled by the Blair Witch to wipe out a series of kids. A handful of them, I think like 7 to 10 kids were killed at the hands of Rustin Parr, sorry. And yeah, that's essentially the story. The three student filmmakers find their way into the Blair Witch's territory, and they get in over their head because they have absolutely no respect for the history, the myth, the possibility that it's real. They apparently the trip was scouted out too. That's what Mike agreed to. Mike said, I agreed to a scouted out trip. And Heather, I believe, implied that it was scouted out, even though I really got the impression that pretty much from the jump, the second they hit the forest, the Black Hills, she doesn't have a clue where she's going. Apparently, at first, the three of them are supposed to be moving in towards a little shack, as they have described it. Mike at one point says, we're going to go find the shack, the shanty, or whatever. And I believe the shack ends up being Rustin Parr's house that they come across at the end, that has all the wood at the front of it broken down. That's always reminded me of the Dead Kennedys logo right at the front door. The D and the K of the Dead Kennedys. It's so obvious. Now, maybe it's only obvious to me because I've loved the Dead Kennedys since I was a kid, and maybe other people like me will find it obvious, but I don't know how you can miss that. The front of Rustin Parr's house has a giant Dead Kennedys logo made out of broken bits of trees and sticks and wood and shit. But anyways, I think that ends up being the shack that they're looking for. But while they're looking for the shack, they come across this rock formation. There's 3 piles of rocks on the ground. And then they decide to go back at night and refilm them, at which point I believe Heather knocks one of the rock piles apart. And then she like kisses her hand and touches one of the rocks, and she's like, you can never be too careful. Well, actually, you should have been a lot more careful. You should have done your research. You should have realized that this Blair Witch is nothing to fuck with. And then, more to the point, when they bump into those 2 dudes fishing earlier on, and one guy's like, damn fool, kids will never learn, you know? You should have heeded those warnings. I mean, and if you take a look at what happened at Coffin Rock, and of course, in the world of the movie, this is all real. So if I was going out making a documentary about a very real witch, apparently, and I was going to the site of one of her supposed atrocities that's documented. Coffin Rock, I believe they were hunters or whatever, they were all gutted and then tied to make some sort of crude pentagram shape or whatever. I'm thinking to myself, like, if this was real, you probably shouldn't be treating it with such levity. But that's exactly what they do. They go in, think they're going to be camping, they're going to be fucking around, and then, of course, Josh sort of Josh maybe has a bit more sense, because at the one point, he starts singing the song from Gilligan's Island, you know? And then they have the little talk about the captain. The captain was fat you know? And then Mike's like, okay, you illiterate TV people, it's the skipper. But for Josh to kind of sing the song, the title track from Gilligan's Island, it always made me wonder if Josh maybe knew more. Because why would you sing that? I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, Gilligan's Island is an old show from the 60s. It's about a crew of people who take off on a sort of like an afternoon tour on this boat, and they get shipwrecked on an island where they spend out the rest of their lives because there's no way off the island because their ship is gone. So for Josh to sing the opening song from Gilligan's Island, it always struck me as sort of a bad omen, you know? And it always made me wonder, maybe did Josh know more? And then toss that up against how it was Josh's stuff that the Blair Witch first messed with, and Josh was the first person that she chose to take. So does that mean that she was hanging out in the woods with them, just out of sight? When he was singing the song, she's like, yo, I used to really like Gilligan's Island, motherfucker, and I don't like you singing it. So I'm going to make an example out of you. I mean, maybe she did watch The Blair Witch. Who knows? I mean, maybe she did watch Gilligan's Island, so who knows? I don't know what these witches can do. She lives in the forest. According to Mary Brown, she likes to expose herself to children, because that's a totally sensible thing for a woman wearing a shawl to do when she comes across a 6-year-old, and just to sort of show her horsehair body with her apparent female genitalia. Oh, wow, that's nice. This Blair Witch is quite the person. And that's a whole other can of worms right there. The Mary Brown situation. They really should have listened to Mary Brown perhaps a lot more carefully. They just thought she was crazy, so they dismissed every single thing she had to say, because in addition to dropping pearls about the Blair Witch and what you should and shouldn't do, Mary Brown was also unfortunately dropping these stories about how she was a ballerina and she was doing research for the government, or she's an astronaut or some shit. So of course everyone's going to dismiss everything that she has to say, no matter how on point some of it might be. I mean, at one point, Heather even brings that up. She says, you know, about what did Mary Brown say about a pile of rocks? Oh, fuck, I wasn't listening to her. I thought she was a lunatic. And there it is. And that taught me when I saw this movie, like, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to dismiss anything anybody has to say about anything weird from this point forward, because no matter how strange that individual may be, their info may still be very factual, you know? I saw this movie 3 times the first day I saw it. I went with me and my buddy Billy to the matinee, and then I hung around for the dinner show at 6, and then I waited for my on-again, off-again girlfriend to get off work at the Eatons at the Pickering Town Center, and then we went to like the 9:45 show. And then the next night, me and her went over to the library trying to research if whether or not it was real, because again, everybody in 1999 thought the Blair Witch was real. This was a legit documentary. 3 kids, they went missing back in '94. The footage was finally being made public, blah, blah, blah. And then they all started turning up on late night talk shows. I remember my buddy Billy called me up and he's like, yo, I don't think the Blair Witch is real. And I was like, why is that? He's like, because Heather's on Leno. You know, because Heather Donahue, she was on The Tonight Show. And I remember he calling me. He was really confused. Like, he didn't get it either, because again, at this point, everybody was under the impression that this was 100% legit. And then you toss in the acting and how on point the acting is and how terrorized they are. There's no way that this can't be real. And of course, here it is all these years later, and of course we know it's not real. But that doesn't take away from the sort of visceral impact of the terror. I mean, I have never been so scared in a movie theater ever, and I don't think anybody else in the theater all day were. Like, at the end of the movie, when you see Mike standing in the corner, you could hear a pin drop in all 3 showings. And I think that that was 100% because we all thought it was real. And that was absolutely terrifying. The fact that the Blair Witch was out there, when I was going to bed that night, I could barely sleep, because it was like there'd finally been some sort of confirmation of actual evil in the world through this documentary, The Blair Witch Project. And then, of course, all that shit was dashed, and I was kind of disappointed. But what are you going to do, right? You know, here it is in 2024, and August 2024, and the Blair Witch is so not real. But the Blair Witch does kick ass. And I think, actually, that's where I'm going to leave it. So thank you so much for hanging out with me for almost 10 minutes while I discuss the 1999 film The Blair Witch Project. Like always, if you like this review or you like this movie, don't forget to go and do something nice for somebody. But most importantly, like always, never forget that the world is a way better place because you are in it. I'm getting out of here. Have a good night.